The Miami Dolphins have made their decision on pass rusher Bradley Chubb, electing not to activate him in time for the team's final two games of the 2024 season. We're exploring why and where the Dolphins and Chubb go from here next on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Cal Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft lead for the 33rd team. Want to give a special shout-out and welcome to our everydayers because it is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. We don't just say it, we live it. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Mike McDaniel spoke before the holiday yesterday. I was planning on having this show up on the holiday yesterday. And that's the thing about holidays is it's not just your schedule anymore. So shame on me. But the Dolphins electing not to activate Bradley Chubb through the end of his 21-day activation window to come off of the PUP list, which he was placed on at the beginning of the year, passed yesterday on Wednesday. Nothing happened. So no Bradley Chubb, the final two games, which I think is a bummer. But there's some strategy behind it that we'll get into and cover as far as future options, the timeline and the conception and versus misconception of his return and assumptions that a lot of people, including myself, made about when Bradley Chubb was going to be ready. But let's start with what Mike McDaniel had to say when it was shared that Chubb would not be activated. With the deadline being tomorrow, we won't activate him, and it came down to this, trying to take reps away from guys that are playing well. Bradley takes this serious, and he's gone after the whole process like he can be Bradley Chubb for this football team, like he knows what that looks like. He's been very patient in the process, very open-minded, had growth as the process went, but ultimately we all decided that we didn't think he would be the player that he expects, that we expect, and just need a little bit more time that unfortunately the season couldn't offer us. He's still all in it. And he was disappointed, but also understands the big picture at stake, and is going to make sure when he's on the field for the Dolphins that everyone feels that he's the player that everyone feels he knows he is. Look, if you want to use the justification of guys playing in that room that are playing well, Mike knows this. I know Mike knows this. There's enough snaps to go around for Chop Robinson and Quinton Bell, who's playing a dozen snaps a game, sometimes more, maybe 20, and Bradley Chubb. So I don't buy for a minute that the reasoning or the logic or the common ground decision that was made off of not wanting to take snaps away from guys who are playing well. Because I think this edge rush room, outside of what Chop Robinson has been affording you the second half of the season, because he has been phenomenal, and credit where credit's due. You're the first month and a half into the season, and you're like, hey, well, I didn't expect big-time production from Chop Robinson off the jump, but you were just worried about how there were games that were being played where like the physicality was getting him on the ground too often. And I don't know what kind of Wheaties he ate or what, but he has flipped the switch, and he deserves all of the praise and accolades. And it's a very exciting talent for the Dolphins to have in their future moving forward. But the pass rush room snaps this past week, not the one against San Francisco, but against Houston. Team gave up 180 yards of offense. Quinton Bell was a 2 expectation player graded performance for me. Chop Robinson was the best graded defensive player on the team, and you still had 41 snaps for Emmanuel Ogbah that were given. And Mohamed Kamara took 2 snaps. In week 14 against the Jets, the pass rush room had 47 snaps or snap opportunities for Emmanuel Ogbah, 38 for Chop Robinson, 28 for Quinton Bell, 3 for Muhammad Kamara. So your primary snap taker continues to be Emmanuel Ogbah as the guy who's just eating the snaps. And that's a guy you absolutely could have used the upgrade over for what you're trying to do and control the controllables and go out and compete and win these 2 games and all the things that they talk about. Which is why I don't buy for a minute that's what it was. Because you can get Bradley Chubb on the field for a dozen snaps a game and not eat into what Chop Robinson and Quinton Bell are doing. But I agree. I think Quinton Bell has started at times to look like the player that he showed that he had the potential to be in training camp. They got a lot of people excited that were attending those practices. So I think that's a guy you look at maybe in the future and you say, hey, maybe is that an edge 4 for us? Core special teams guy, plays dozen snaps a game on defense, probably on early downs, unless the pass rush plan really clicks into place for him, which maybe it can because he was a offensive skill player until like his final year in college. So the decision really feels like it has to do with long-term flexibility, which is one of the things that this team has preached as the ideologies. And I know there's questions about Chris Grier and his future as the general manager of the team. If it were me, if I were Stephen Ross, I would be transitioning at that position. But there's other powers that be within this football operation, like Brandon Shore and the job that he does writing contracts as a C-suite executive on the team. Tom Garfinkel, right? And obviously head coach Mike McDaniel. Those are all significant power presences within the operation the Dolphins have in place. And the guy who conducts the football assessments, that if you make that change, it doesn't necessarily change the big picture organizational ideology that this team has been chasing. And what complicates that for Bradley Chubb, of course, is the fact that he's due just short of, or I guess with the workout bonus, it'd be just over $19.5 million in cash next year. And over half of that is guaranteed for injury. So if Bradley Chubb, if you were to move on from Bradley Chubb this offseason and he failed a physical, say he came back and played again and got hurt and failed a physical at the time in which you tried to move on from him as a player, you would owe him $10 million of his $19.45 million base salary that you're on the hook for. You got to write the check if you can't pass physical. Now, because it's guaranteed for injury, if you work through the rehab process and he's able to practice and he's cleared to practice, and then you choose not to run him out there for the last 2 games, you're guaranteeing that a football injury will not be what keeps Bradley Chubb from being on the roster in 2025, which therefore protects you from the $10 million injury guarantee on his salary. I've contract and iterations of his contract for what the Dolphins could choose to do up on my screen here. We'll pull them up a little later in the show, because I think it's important for Dolphins fans to recognize there was a lot of, when the decision was made, I was surprised at the amount of reporters, and I'm not going to put any words in anybody's mouth because I hate when people that do that to me, and I don't make any assumptions. But there were a lot of people that seemed to use language that indicated they felt like Bradley Chubb was going to be back on the team next year. And while that's a real possibility, that I get scared of that as being an edge rush room, because you've got Bradley Chubb with his injury history. You have Jalen Phillips coming off of a second consecutive season-ending injury. And those would be your top 2 paid guys. I mean, Jalen Phillips in 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I'm not a math guy. He's playing on his 5th-year option next year. It's like $14 million. So you got those 2 guys combined are going to be looking at about $35 million. And they played 4 games for you this year. Do we want to do that again? And it's nothing against the caliber player. They're both outstanding football players. Their quality starters as their floor and their cornerstones as their ceiling, if you can count on them to stay on the field. But right now we can't. And it's, well, let's get through this final 2 games. Let's figure out where, from a football operations standpoint, let's preserve the flexibility that we have to trade Bradley Chubb, post June 1st cut Bradley Chubb, whatever that looks like. And again, I have all those iterations, and you're not going to like some of them. So I think they're pretty unattractive as options for you. Or alternatively, keep Bradley Chubb. Like we'll look at all of it. I want to talk a little bit more about his return, the perception of his return, the windfall for the Dolphins from a pass rush perspective. That's going to be coming your way next here on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. The holiday season is expensive, and it can certainly sneak up on you throughout the year when you can just a few taps on your phone, like get a subscription and sign up for something, and then forget you have it. Rocket Money can save you money and help find the subscriptions that you forgot you were paying for, or potentially even paying for twice. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or the goals for the future year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions, reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. I don't know how much this the Dolphins did or did not anticipate. I think it probably further amplifies the decision the team made with drafting Chop Robinson in the first round of the 2024 NFL draft. Although you don't like to draft for need, you theoretically should not draft for need ever, because that's how you paint yourself into a corner and draft players that aren't actual authentic values. And that's what that experience of the draft is all about, is finding values to add to your football team, because they're cost-controlled values. Now, fortunately, the conviction that this group had in Chop Robinson is paying off for them in a big way. I think he's well on his way. And that's why you bet on athletic traits and elite physical profiles. And it's bit the Dolphins and it's blessed the Dolphins. It's done both in recent years. But I know that the focus being on an edge rusher for the Dolphins in the first round, I wonder how much they knew of the degree of difficulty Bradley Chubb was facing, where you were going to come all the way down to the buzzer till Christmas Eve to have to make a decision on whether or not you were going to activate him to even play in a football game this year. I do wonder if they knew the recovery window and timeline for Bradley Chubb, why that didn't change their outlook on Andrew Van Ginkel. And I'm not going to sit here and do the Andrew Van Ginkel war cry that, it's great to see him playing well, and I'll always wish him success. And whether the Dolphins did offer him a contract or they didn't offer him a contract, or they gave him a verbal number that they knew they weren't going to be competitive for what they felt he was going to get elsewhere, and whether or not they should have been competitive with what else he was going to get elsewhere. Like, who knows? There's a lot of different versions of that story that are out there. But you do wonder if the Dolphins knew that there was a realistic chance that Bradley Chubb was going to miss the entirety of the 2024 season. Does that change your appetite on retaining Andrew Van Ginkel last offseason? I would have hoped the answer would have been yes. So you get some context clues with drafting Chop Robinson, but then you're getting mixed signals from the personnel moves. I think you are, as you're trying to make sense of what moves the team did and did not make. The understanding of how severe the Bradley Chubb injury was, that it was an ACL plus. It takes a full calendar year to even get on the doorstep where now you have this strategic decision that, you're alluding to, it's productive. Mike McDaniel said it was productive because it helps get him. He knows where he's starting the year at. There's no guesswork. He's out there on the field, so he knows what he needs to do to stack and get back to being the caliber player that he's capable of being. That's all fair. That doesn't help you feel any better about this situation and what it has been for a Dolphins team that is 7-8 and was looking to make a postseason run and is now looking to get the help that they need to even punch their ticket to be the 7 seed and earn the right to go to Buffalo, because that's what's on the line. You'd be the 7 seed if you got in. If the Broncos lose their next 2 and the Colts lose one of their next 2 and you win out, you're going to be the 2 or the 7, and you're going to go play in Buffalo for a third playoff game. Like that's your prize for pulling it off if you pull it off. And it wasn't supposed to be like that. Not this season. So, as I reflect on this pass rush room, and I know I already alluded to it, you got a lot of assets rolled into this room. And this Bradley Chubb trade, again, I love the player. I love Bradley Chubb, the player. He's an outstanding leader. He's got great intangibles. He works super hard. He's got that physicality element plus dynamic athleticism that we are missing in so many spots on the defensive side of the ball. Like, he provides a lot of answers for you. But this was the book on Bradley Chubb before Bradley Chubb got here, was the durability concerns. And since the trade deadline, he missed a handful of games in 2022. And I was a fan of the trade at the time. But as this one ages and as new information is gathered and time passes, I think you'd be stubborn to just stay in what your priors were, because that's what your priors were and you want to be right. And I got why they made the move, and you give them credit for it. They went after it. Now, if you go after it and you don't get it, what does that mean for you? I think that's where everybody's at with some of the players involved. And by players, I mean the executive running the team, Chris Greer. And I think it'd be justified because of unfortunate bets like this that were bets that didn't cash. But the Dolphins will have to figure out where they're going from here. And I've ran the numbers so we can go over it. But I do wonder if the decision not to activate Bradley Chubb is also any indication of the stability or lack thereof of the person who would be making such decisions from a football operations standpoint. And again, that's Chris Greer. Like, is this a further sign that, hey, we don't want to do this and put ourselves on the hook for $10 million in injury guaranteed salary if something went wrong, for somebody else to come in and try to have to solve and cut away on their flexibility to redirect however they feel is appropriate. So there's a lot of maybes and ifs and speculations that are all involved with a move like this. But the one thing I do know is that, we've got too many snaps going to guys that are playing well right now that we don't want to take away from. That doesn't pass the sniff test for me. I'm sorry, it doesn't. But we do have a chance to look at where the Dolphins can go from here. We're going to do that next here on this episode of Locked on Dolphins, so make sure that you stick with us. NFL playoffs are almost here. It's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel has many ways for you to pick up a dub. I love betting on the game totals. I think the spreads are a fun way to get in on the action as well, but they have more ways for you to bet and for you to win. FanDuel also has bets for which players will score touchdowns, how many points each team will score, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. As things currently stand over on FanDuel, as we get ready for Week 17, notoriously not nice game for the Dolphins in the last 5 years. Week 17 has been a very unpleasant experience effectively every time. The Dolphins are favored by 6.5 points as of right now. It was 5.5, so it's expanded to 6.5. In Week 17, Dolphins at 4 o'clock going to go play in Cleveland. So never waste a hunch, make every moment more with FanDuel. So I'm going to pull up on my screen for those of you who are watching on YouTube. And if you're not watching on YouTube, don't worry. We'll talk through it. The current iteration of the Bradley Chubb contract, which I thought was interesting that when you retroactively look back at how they chose to handle creating cap space from the Bradley Chubb contract last year, they took some of his salary, but not all of his salary. They left $6 million in base salary to avoid prorating more money out into the future. And when you make a move like that, that is some kind of an indication of, hey, perhaps we want to maintain the viability of an exit. They could have really taken almost another $5 million and created another $4 million in cap space, because they would have taken a $6 million salary and they could have cut it down to like 1.2. And then the other 4.8 could have also been added to the distribution across the next 5 years, including 2024, as restructured dollars, right? So he was on the books this year for 15.8 against the cap. I think what is slept on a little bit as just, it's a subplot, and it's not a ton of money, but it's money all the same. He has a roster bonus for every game that he's active, and that is equal to $680,000. Well, Bradley Chubb, he's not going to see a cent of that $680,000 next year because he didn't play in a game this year. So you are knocking down the cash owed for Bradley Chubb for 2025 by $680,000 because he didn't play in any games. So it's a start, right? But the 2025 salary being $19.45 million and 10 of that being guaranteed for injury, that's going to go away now because there's no injury risk. He's been cleared to play. They're going to throw him on ice, and you're going to get to the offseason and figure out what the plan of attack is. As far as the plans of attack, you could theoretically cut or trade Bradley Chubb before June 1st. And that is, for those of you watching on YouTube, the scenario here. This is cut or trade Bradley Chubb before June 1st, 2025. If you traded him, obviously somebody would take the 3 years, and it's equal to about $57 million, $56 million in salary. Somebody would just take that. And you would be left with the remnants of his signing bonus when he signed the contract in 2022. You'd be left with the remnants of his 2023 salary that was restructured, and you'd be left with the 2024 salary that was restructured. And that number's not as big as it could have been because they chose not to restructure Bradley Chubb. All of those dollars combined equal $27,386,978. That is a cap savings versus what he's currently scheduled for in 2025 of $1.27 million. So you can move on from Bradley Chubb in whatever way that you chose would be most cost effective before June 1st, either cut or trade. And you'd save $1.27 million in cap space. And then you would proceed to save $29.3 million in cap space in 2026, $29.6 million in 2027, and $2.75 million in 2028. There's some nice dollars that you're talking about adding up, but at the expense of effectively, you're breaking even against the cap in 2025. Or you could spread this thing out and you could do option number 2, which is a post June 1st cut or trade for Bradley Chubb. Remember, if you can cut a player in March and designate him as a post June 1st cut. The Dolphins did this last year with Xavier Howard. The fine print on that decision, though, is that you cannot access any of the cap savings until June 2nd. So the Dolphins, if they were to trade Bradley Chubb after June 1st, or if they were to cut Bradley Chubb and designate him as a post-June 1st cut. Those are your options. You can't trade him in March and designate it as a post-June 1st trade. It doesn't work like that. So you could either hold him until after June 1st and then trade him, or you can cut him with a designation. You're going to carry the $28.6 million cap hit until that transaction is processed. And that includes if you cut him, he's free to go sign somewhere else, but you have to carry the $28.6 million cap hit until June 2nd, in which case the cap hit becomes $9.11 million. So that's a savings of $19.55 million in cap space in 2025 versus what you're currently scheduled for. But the $19.5 million doesn't kick in until June 2nd. The rest of the money, which is $18.275 million cap charge, you would take in 2026 as dead money, which is what the Dolphins are doing with Xavier Howard, so the rest of his dead money. So it would be $19.5 million in cap savings in 2025 that is not active until June 2nd, and then $11 million in cap savings in 2026 because you're carrying $18 million in dead cap, and then $29.6 million savings in 2027, which is the last year that he's contracted to be on the team, because that becomes zero cap hit versus $29.674 million. And then $2.75 million in savings in 2028. So those are your departure options. You can take it all up front and clear almost $30 million in cap space, or $60 million in cap space over the next 2 years. Or you can split it between 2025 and 2026, knowing the fine print. But the other option that may be inspired to do this is looking at, well, what happens if they keep Bradley Chubb? What happens if they say, oh, well, we know he's going to be healthy. We like the way he looks. We don't want to open up another premium need on the position chart for us. We're willing to take the risk. Bless you if that's the decision you choose to make. And just for round numbers, I said, okay, he's due $19.45 million. What if they just took $18 million? And if they were to do a max restructure, they could add an additional void year on the back end of the contract. So he's scheduled to play in 2025, 2026, 2027. Then they have a dummy year that they added last year when they did their restructure last year as just a placeholder for the $2.75 million in money that he was paid in 2024 that they put on a dummy year in 2028 just to be able to hold some of the cap, create a little extra cap space. You can do that again, and presumably with a larger number this time. So if you took $18 million, now they could take 9, they could take 10, they could take 12. They chose last year not to take the maximum amount, but if you were to do a maximum restructure with Bradley Chubb, and just for round numbers, I took $18 million. That leaves him with a $1.45 million salary to play on the team in 2025. Plus, he would get a lump sum check of $18 million. And then he's getting his $100,000 workout bonus. He's not getting any of his $680,000 per game active bonus because that's like games that you played in 2024. You get paid for in 2025 as the bonus. And you're not getting any of that money. What you're left with is Bradley Chubb could theoretically play on the team in 2025 if you did a max restructure of his contract for about $14.2 million in cap space. That's less than it was last year by about $1.5 million. So you could save $14.4 million in cap space if you restructured $18 million in cash and put an extra void year on the back end of the deal. So you could cut his cap number in half for 2025 to play. The domino effect is each of the next 4 years of salary cap, 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029, which, again, he'd be contracted to play in 2 of those that he probably wouldn't see. And then he'd have a void year in 2028 and 2029 as placeholders for a salary cap. It's $3.6 million in each of those next 4 years is the prorated portion of the $18 million that we took out. So you'd add that to the cap charges for each of the next 4 seasons after that to cut his cap charge in half in 2025. It's a little spooky, right? But If you did the post-June 1st thing in 2026, after max restructuring in 2025, I'm just going to say the cap savings versus what they're currently scheduled to be. If you did the max restructure, you'd save $14.4 million in cap space in 2025. And then if you did a post-June 1st cut in 2026, he'd be on the hook for $13.39 million in cap, which is a savings of $15.95 still from what it's currently scheduled to be in 2026. So you'd still save 15.9, you just can't access it before June 2nd. And then you'd save $9.7 million in cap space in 2027, and then you'd save $2.75 million in cap space in 2028. Assuming it's play in 2025 with a max restructure and then post-June 1st cut in 2026. The Dolphins could, of course, also go to Bradley Chubb and say, hey, we like you. We want you to be here. Are you willing to take a pay cut to play here? And see what his answer is. If his answer is yes, then all of the extra gymnastics that we just spent 10 minutes going through become nullified. Because if Bradley Chubb says, yeah, I'll play this year for $9 million, the cap charge is automatically going to go down to 18.2, and you didn't add any cap liabilities to future years. Do I think it's likely that Bradley Chubb's going to say, yeah, I'll just give money back? Probably not. Teron Armstead did it last year. I'll give Teron all the credit in the world. You got to shoot your shot, shoot or shoot. But that's where the Dolphins are at from an options perspective with Bradley Chubb. We'll see what they choose to do soon enough. But they've already made the first step in the decision because they've committed to not putting Bradley Chubb back out on the field. That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys, as always, for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'll be back again soon, perhaps even later today. A little bit more Dolphins football talk coming your way. So I will hope to see you then. Kyle Krabs, I'm out of here. Go Fins.